for offices, especially here in New Hampshire. There's so many of us.
Voices from the States, part of C-SPAN's 50 Capitals Tour.
With 4 days until the election, C-SPAN is your primary source for campaign 2018. Up next, a debate from Maine, where independent Senator Angus King is running for re-election against Republican Eric Brakey and Democrat Zak Ringelstein. This comes to us courtesy of the Maine Public Broadcasting Network. It's just under an hour.
Hello and welcome to Maine Public's Your Vote 2018 U.S. Senate debate. I'm Jennifer Rooks here with Maine Public political reporters Mal Leary and Steve Missler. We're coming to you from the Studzinski Recital Hall on the campus of Bowdoin College in Brunswick. For the next hour, we will hear from the three candidates vying to represent Maine in the U.S. Senate. Let's meet the candidates in alphabetical order. Republican Eric Brakey of Auburn has served in the Maine Senate since 2014. He was Maine State Director for the 2012 Ron Paul presidential campaign in Maine. Brakey graduated from Ohio University. Independent Angus King of Brunswick is the incumbent in this race. He was first elected to the U.S. Senate in 2012. Before that, King served 2 terms as governor of Maine. He has also been a lecturer at Bowdoin College, the owner of an alternative energy company, and a television host. King earned a bachelor's from Dartmouth College and a law degree from the University of Virginia School of Law. And Democrat Zak Ringelstein of Yarmouth is a teacher who developed a program to help connect classrooms around the world. Ringelstein taught in the Portland Public School District from 2016 to 2017. He earned a bachelor's from Columbia University and a master's from Arizona State University. The questions in this debate come from the Maine Public News team, and as you will see later in the debate, from you, members of the public. We're going to start off again in alphabetical order with our first question, but in the interest of fairness, we will shuffle that order over the next hour. In this opening segment, we are going to tackle some front burner issues. Each candidate will have 1 minute to respond to each. Question 1 will be about health care. Steve Missler.
Eric Brakey, you've expressed opposition to the Affordable Care Act, but millions of Americans rely on the law for their health insurance. What needs to be in the ACA replacement to get your support?
Well, first of all, let me say thank you for having me here today. I am Eric Brakey. I'm the state senator who reformed welfare, passed constitutional carry, and expanded access to health care while serving as the Senate chairman for the Health and Human Services Committee. And to your question, taxing poor people for being too poor to afford health insurance is not a realistic solution to our problem. You know, we need to look at market-driven solutions. The problem in our system right now is that you have these third-party middlemen standing between us and our doctors, big government bureaucrats, big corporate insurance company executives standing between us and our doctors. We need to restore that one-to-one doctor-patient relationship, empower regular people to be in charge of their care again. And the way that we do that is with market-driven solutions, like allowing people to save tax-free through health savings accounts, allowing people to buy insurance across state lines to increase choice and competition, and allowing people to collectively bargain with insurance companies to increase the leverage we have through health associations. These are real market-driven solutions that can make health care affordable for Maine people.
Thank you, Eric. Mal.
Angus King, Congress continues to debate ways to pay for health care, but there's been little debate about lowering the cost of health care. What specific legislation would you introduce to lower drug prices, hospital costs, and the cost of doctor visits?
Well, that's exactly the right question. For the past 10 years, we've been debating who pays: Medicare, Medicaid, ACA, private insurance. But the real question is the one you point out. How much are we paying? We're paying about twice as much per person for health care in America than any other country in the world. And the problem is, why is that happening and what can we do about it? Here's some things. One is drugs. Prescription drugs are becoming a bigger and bigger part of the problem. The cost is a bigger part of the problem. One of the very first bills I signed on to when I went to the Senate was one that you would think would be common sense, that Medicare can negotiate for the millions of dollars worth of drugs that they buy for seniors. They're not allowed to do that under current law. That would save taxpayers and the healthcare system about $25 billion a year. So control on prescription drugs, I think, is a very important part of the solution. We also need to encourage programs like accountable care organizations, where instead of paying insurance to treat us when we're sick, we pay our physicians and our providers to keep us well.
Zak Ringelstein, you support Medicare for all, but if there's not enough congressional support for such a program, how else would you seek to increase access and affordability to health care?
Sure, so I support Medicare for all. I would argue that neither Eric nor Angus have a solution. They talk around problems because they're not willing to commit. I have committed solutions to our healthcare crisis. This is nothing less than a crisis. I had a student a couple years ago who got misdiagnosed by a local clinic. Her parents didn't have access to health care, and this student ended up getting diagnosed with leukemia after we noticed that she was jaundiced in our classroom and died. This is happening in this country, the United States of America, the richest country on earth. 17% of our GDP goes to health care, and yet we have the worst results of any developed economy. This is ridiculous that Angus keeps talking about the Affordable Care Act and that Eric has no solution. We need a solution. It's Medicare for all. It's covering everybody, because healthcare is a human right, and I don't want to have to meet another Mainer who has to tell me that they're paying a second mortgage for their healthcare, or that they are in fear of going to the hospital for something that will save their lives.
And if the audience could please refrain from applauding until the end of the debate. Question 2 addresses incivility and violence. Mal.
Angus King, over your time in the Senate, the partisan rhetoric has certainly increased, and the politics of hate has started to dominate political rhetoric. As one senator, what could you do to turn down the heated rhetoric and restore some semblance of civility to politics?
Well, I think the first thing we have to realize, Mal, is that we're all responsible for our words. Words matter. And I think all of us in public life have to be cognizant of that what what we're saying can trigger uncivil activities among people who may not be all that engaged in the political process. So that's one. In the Senate, my whole thrust has been working across the aisle, developing relationships with members of on both sides, and making those kinds of relationships so that I think the best way to put it is, you can't hate someone if you know the names of their kids. And so often now we don't have relationships, and therefore it's easy to demonize someone else. And what I've tried to do is work with my colleagues informally in the Senate, having dinner together, going to the prayer breakfast on Wednesday morning, which believe it or not is the only bipartisan event of the week, to try to develop relationships so that we can get out of this hot rhetoric that I think is really harming the country. I've always tried to take that role as a person to be civil and thoughtful and reasonable.
Steve.
Zak Ringelstein, every day it seems we see more examples of political violence, including most recently with pipe bombs and the synagogue shooting in Pittsburgh. Is there anything a senator can do to change the tone in Washington?
Yes. Yes, there is. We need calls for peace, and we need calls for love, and we need calls for people to drop out of this race who are not calling for these things. 11 Americans were killed by a white supremacist in a synagogue who believed that leftists and globalists want to replace us with refugees. They want to import our population, including dangerous killers seeking to infiltrate Western countries. I quote this because those were not the words of the killer, those are the words of Senator Eric Brakey. He should be ashamed of himself for inciting violence, for being part of the problem, and quite frankly, for being racist and for siding with neo-Nazis. You should, truly, you should be ashamed of yourself.
Eric, please wait for your turn. Go ahead.
Thank you. Because this is very important. It's important to our national dialogue that we have a dialogue of hope, that we're not trying to score political points by fear-mongering. And quite frankly, Eric, in 2016, you didn't even support Donald Trump, and now you are a MAGA fan. It doesn't make any sense. This is a con job that no Mainer should put up with, and we need to start calling him out and rejecting this.
Eric
Brakey, I'm going to ask you the question. I know you want to respond to what he said. You've touted your strong support for the Second Amendment in your campaign, but given the recent violence, is it time to take another look at the laws that allow people to buy the ingredients for making a bomb, or further limits on the ability to buy a gun?
Well, there's a few things in there. First, I need to respond to some of the ridiculous accusations that were thrown out. Well, first of all, Zach, you're the one polling at 9% in this race. If anyone should drop out, maybe you should be looking at dropping out. You know, excuse me, I think it's very childish, the rhetoric that you're espousing right now. You know, we have a serious debate about some serious issues in front of us, and we're here to have that debate and have that discussion. To the question here about the Second Amendment, I'm proud of my support for the Second Amendment. I'm proud of the fact I have an A+ rating with the NRA, an A+ rating with Gun Owners of Maine, and A+ rating with the Sportsmen's Alliance of Maine. My primary opponent, Angus King, has a D with the NRA, a D with the Gun Owners of Maine, and only a B with the Sportsmen's Alliance of Maine. In fact, they specifically chose not to endorse him because of his support for gun control. You know, here's the thing at the end of the day. We can pass all the laws we want to pass to say that people can't have this or can't have that, but at the end of the day, criminals don't obey the laws. That's the problem that we have. When we pass gun control laws, the people that we're disarming are law-abiding citizens who would use them for self-defense. Here in Maine, we're a constitutional carry state. We're ranked the safest state in America. In fact, 4 out of the top 5 safest states in America are all constitutional carry states.
Thank you, Eric.
If we're going to defend ourselves, we need to be able to have the right of self-defense.
Steve, do you have a question for Zak Ringelstein?
I do. Zach, you have talked about the need to address the problem of climate change in your campaign. What specific legislation would you propose in Congress to get at that problem?
Yes, so many people have seen the UN climate report. It says we don't have time. It doesn't say we have to move incrementally with gas and with fracking and with oil. It says we don't have time. My 2.5-year-old and my 7-month-old, who I just left at home with my wife, Leah, they're not going to have a world that is safe because of floods and drought and fire. We need to act now. I support converting to 100% renewable energy by 2035. It's called a Green New Deal. And a Green New Deal is this belief that we can convert, and by unifying together and converting, we can then create high-wage jobs at the same time that we're saving our planet. Meanwhile, Angus King is taking money from ExxonMobil. And I'd like to ask him, Angus, will you stop taking money from ExxonMobil and from the fossil fuel industry, sir?
Yes.
Will you give the money back that you've taken?
Yes.
Phenomenal. Thank you. Can we do a press conference tomorrow?
How about, you have a few minutes.
I really do sincerely applaud you for that. Thank you.
You have a few minutes or seconds left. How about a carbon tax? That, in that report you mentioned, was specifically mentioned as a way to stem the tide, if you will.
So I think a carbon tax is another incremental step. I think that we don't have time. I think we need to go for this Green New Deal. We have what it takes here. We have the best potential for solar. We have UMaine and Bowdoin and Bates and colleges in this state who have already built the technology.
Thank you, Zach. Mal, you have a question for Eric.
Eric Brakey, climate change is already affecting several fisheries here in Maine, and that affects Maine's economy. What legislation would you propose in Congress to help the industry adapt to climate change, such as developing new fishery markets?
Well, first of all, let me say I think that everyone on this stage wants to have a cleaner environment. The question is, how do we actually accomplish that? And many of the big government proposals that have been put out, like the Climate Accord, were feel-good measures that didn't actually do anything. But you know what has made a big difference in reducing our greenhouse gas emissions? It has actually been switching over from oil to natural gas, to bridge fuels, that actually make a practical difference in lowering our footprint. But I'll tell you one thing that certainly doesn't help, which is some of the fake green energy that's out there. It certainly doesn't help blowing off the tops of our mountains to benefit certain special interest companies. That certainly doesn't help us, especially because the wind doesn't necessarily blow when we want it to. If we want to get free from dependence on foreign oil, we're never going to do that with windmills. It doesn't make any sense. I've worked in the energy industry for the last 7 years. It doesn't make any sense. But certain special interests, primarily Senator Angus King, who helped put legislation in place to force us to subsidize these companies, have made a lot of money on the backs of Maine taxpayers.
Steve Missler.
Angus King, you have said that the issue of climate change is a priority, but other than rejoining the Paris Climate Agreement, what specific steps would you take in Congress to get at the problem? And please address the issue of a carbon tax.
Well, I can think of a couple of ones just off the top of my head. One is we had a rule on the Senate floor to abolish the methane rule involved with fracking. There was a rule that limited the amount of methane. Methane is a greenhouse gas that's twice as, or I don't think it's twice, I think it's something like 40 times as potent as CO2. I voted to maintain that rule, to keep it in place, a very specific opportunity. The other was the Clean Power Plan, which it was really a very creative way of approaching this problem. It didn't say, the federal government, the EPA didn't say, this is what you have to do. It said to the states, here's the goal, you figure out how to get there. I think that is the way we ought to be pursuing these kinds of things. The other thing is we need to support the gradual increase in the mileage standards, which the current administration has talked about repealing. That's part of the problem. And renewable energy is certainly part of it. And Zach talks about 2035. I think we'll make it by then. The big deal in energy in the last 5 years or 10 years has been the decline in the cost of solar. It's gone from $70 a watt to 50 cents a watt. And I was in Milo, Maine, 3 days ago, where they're going to build a 65-acre solar farm, a similar one in Sanford. That's the way to go, and we're getting there.
Thank you, Senator King. We're going to go on to some questions now that have been designed for each candidate specifically. These aren't necessarily on the same theme. These have been crafted by our news staff, and you'll have 1 minute to respond, just like the others. We'll start with Mal with a question for Zak Ringelstein.
What public polling we've seen so far in this race has you in the single digits. Yet you're the nominee of the Democratic Party. That's the largest political party in the state. Why do you think you've not gained more support among members of your own party?
Well, first of all, students took a vote the other day. Of course, we know polling doesn't really work these days, it's just calling landlines. And students took a vote, and I had surged like 14 or 15 points. So just to be very clear, I think that that's not a real reflection of what's going on. I think a big thing here is that people don't understand ranked choice voting, that they can vote their hopes. They don't have to vote for the status quo. We're so used to having a spoiler and having to vote for the lesser of two evils. I think we all remember this very well during the presidential election. We don't have to do that. We can vote our hopes for the future. We can vote for Medicare for all, for 100% renewable energy, for raising teacher salaries, for someone who hasn't, for example, vetoed minimum wage increases. Or, I'm sorry, but Senator Angus King, you co-sponsored a bill to deregulate banks this year. Someone who takes money from Bank of America. We could take someone who's not taking corporate, PAC, lobbyist, or fossil fuel money. And so now that people understand ranked choice, I think that we're the kind of candidate who's the people's candidate. We're not the corporate candidate. We're not the established candidate, and we're very proud of it.
All right, next question from Steve to Eric Brakey.
Last week you tweeted a widely debunked story that ISIS militants were arrested in the so-called migrant caravan, even though those arrests by Guatemalan authorities were made before the caravan even formed and were completely unrelated to it. This week you tweeted without evidence that mysterious forces on the left were importing migrants to lead the country towards socialism. Do you believe that people seeking elected office, in your case, one of the highest offices in the federal government, should use Twitter to spread unproven or debunked claims?
Well, first of all, I think you're taking a lot of that out of context, but let me put this in context. So here are the actual facts. You have this, excuse me, here are the actual facts. You have this migrant caravan coming from Honduras, and frankly, many of these are very good people. I can understand why they want to come to America. America is a great country with a lot of opportunity, but they're passing through countries like Guatemala, where we have had confirmed presence of ISIS cells in the very recent past. Just because 100 people were deported doesn't mean that they got everyone. And the point is, we don't know who's coming here. There is no security. If we just let people come across the border with no vetting, no process to know, that's a potential. That's putting us potentially in danger.
Is that what happens at the border? They're not vetted? Well, are they not vetted at the border?
Well, I'm saying that there needs to be vetting at the border, but also further, you know, I can certainly appreciate and understand why people want to come here. Frankly, if I were in their shoes, I'd probably want to come here too. But the thing is, we can't, Milton Friedman told us, a Nobel Prize winning economist, it's just obvious you can't have open borders and a welfare state. That will bankrupt us. Our immigration system is not a poverty relief program. If we want to fight poverty across the world, it's capitalism that is making the difference. And that's why global poverty has dropped.
Thank you, Eric. Mal has a question for Angus King now.
Senator King, you've been attacked as a Democrat masquerading as an independent. You do caucus with the Democrats and often vote with them. How do you respond to that criticism?
Basically, the decisions I try to make are the decisions. The first question is, how will it affect Maine? And that's where I start. Somebody said, you vote with Chuck Schumer. Zach the other day said, you vote with President Trump. I vote with the people of Maine, and I vote with my own conscience. So I make the decisions as best I can based on the facts. I try to dig in. Now, I've already been criticized here today. Zach criticized me for voting for a bipartisan bank reform bill, which basically was directed at community banks and credit unions. You can ask any community bank or a credit union.
Zach, please.
And not the biggest banks, mid-sized banks, not Bank of America was not included in that bill, had no involvement whatsoever. But that's an example of a bipartisan bill. I've been working, the student loan reform that I worked on in 2013 was entirely bipartisan. Just last week, Chuck Grassley, Republican senator, myself, Dick Durbin, Democratic senator, put forth a bill that goes to your other question about prescription prices of those drug ads, put the prices on the air. We didn't quite make the bill, but the administration called me last week and said, we're going to do it by rule.
Thank you, Senator King. And we're going to be right back with the candidates for U.S. Senate. Welcome back to this Your Vote 2018 Senate debate. I'm Jennifer Rooks. Now we offer the chance for the candidates to ask questions of one another. Candidates will have 20 seconds to pose the question, and the other candidate will have 1 minute to respond. The questioner will have a chance to briefly follow up if necessary. The first question, Eric Brakey will ask Angus King.
Senator King, yes or no question, do you support this Central Maine power corridor through Somerset County?
No.
Angus King, you may ask Zak Ringelstein a question.
Zach, I think we can tell a lot about people by who they look up to. Who are your political heroes? If there's one person in American history you could have dinner with, who would it be?
Wow, I'll take that challenge, and I'm going to go with John Lewis. Does anyone know who John Lewis is? John Lewis, someone actually I got to hang out with recently. He's a civil rights hero. And he is somebody who was literally on the Freedom Rides in 1961 and reminded me, as we sat down together, that he wasn't even allowed to leave D.C. next to a white person in 1961. Then he gave a speech next to Martin Luther King on the March on Washington, and he actually he wanted to criticize Kennedy more, but was told not to. So I got some of the inside facts, but the thing that John Lewis has still is this just unbreakable hope. And he said, even though this time is tough, even though we are on the brink of authoritarianism, even though we have a military-industrial complex, even though there is oppression, he said, we have to, Zach, he said, you have to project hope. And that was an astounding thing to hear, and that's what our campaign's about.
A great choice, and especially because I have an Instagram with me and John Lewis.
So Zak Ringelstein.
We didn't plan that, I promise.
Zak Ringelstein, you have a chance to ask Eric Brakey a question.
Sure. So in the last few days, you have gone ahead and attacked immigrants. And, I taught in immigrant communities the majority of my career. And all the immigrants I know have more integrity in their pinky than, honestly, you have in your entire body. From the way that I have seen things in the last few days, I have just been really disappointed at the racist, borderline neo-Nazi rhetoric. And honestly, it's a disgrace that we have a white supremacist on this stage with us in a U.S. Senate debate. We need to call
20 seconds.
Is there a question there, Zach?
Yeah,
or
sure.
are you just on your bully pulpit?
Can you sleep at night?
Zach, here's the thing. Maine people are sick and tired of being called racist simply because we don't want our communities to transform overnight. We're sick and tired of being called racist because we don't want non-citizens on our welfare rolls ahead of people who've paid into the system. We're sick and tired of being called racist. Excuse me, Zach. You asked me a question, and I'm answering it.
Please no.
You've been incredibly disrespectful. We're trying to have a conversation here, and you seem to be the only person on this stage who's actually obsessed with race. So if there's someone racist on this stage right here, I'm looking right at you.
That's ridiculous.
So I'll say to the audience, if you're yelling and screaming, then the audience at home will not hear what your candidate has to say. That's how microphones work. So the next person, Eric Brakey, you may ask Zak Ringelstein a question.
Zach, you support open borders and Medicare for all. How do you expect to have a giant welfare state and the opportunity for anyone and everyone to come here and sign up for it?
So the way that I see America is very differently than I think most. First and foremost, we are taxing the working dollar, the workers' dollars in the state, way more than we're taxing the very wealthy. The very wealthy make a lot of money off of unearned income, which is through dividends, through financial transactions, through estates, and through capital gains. We need to make sure we're taxing there. And we also know that, for example, Medicare for all would actually cost us less. We pay the most per capita on healthcare of any country in the world at 17%. But other countries have better healthcare systems. They have single payer, Medicare for all style systems, and at most they're paying 13%. So my policies are bringing prosperity. Immigration, as the great conservatives have always said, brings prosperity. And we need to remember that. There's all the research in the world to look at, and I look forward to sharing it with you after this debate.
Even your hero Bernie Sanders acknowledges that you can't have both of these things.
Angus King, you may ask Eric Brakey a question.
Eric, if you go to the United States Senate, it's likely that your Republican colleagues will bring up a bill to repeal the Affordable Care Act, which would eliminate the protection for pre-existing conditions. It would allow seniors to have to pay 5 times as much as younger people. The seniors call it the age tax. My question is, again, I'll return the favor, yes or no, would you vote for a repeal of the Affordable Care Act?
I would immediately vote to repeal and replace the Obamacare. I think that Obamacare has completely failed to address the real problems in our healthcare system. It was written by the insurance lobby. Of course the insurance lobby loved it because it forced people to buy their product. There are real solutions that we can pursue to tackle the cost of healthcare in our country, including, as I've listed before, allowing people to save tax-free through health savings accounts, allowing people to purchase insurance across state lines to increase choice and competition, allowing people to collectively bargain through health associations. There are many things we can do, but the idea that we're going to have a one-size-fits-all solution from Washington, D.C. that's going to work for everyone as big and large as we are as a country, it frankly doesn't work.
So would you allow pre-existing conditions to be repealed?
I think that pre-existings are a real problem, and I think that we can look at solutions for that, but that doesn't mean that we have to be inching more and more towards a complete government control of our healthcare system.
All right, so Zak Ringelstein, you may ask a question of Angus King.
Yeah, Senator King. So in 2014, you endorsed Susan Collins. You voted against equal pay for women, and you were a deciding vote on a bill that would have made it so that there was actual sexual assault prevention in the military. I have a brother in the military, 2 brothers who have served abroad, and they both have said that legislation would have definitely worked, and these are officers we're talking about. How do you explain yourself? How do women support your campaign given these votes?
Well, let's take them one at a time. I endorsed Susan Collins in 2014 because I thought she was doing a great job as a senator. I worked with her closely. I saw her work. I saw her make her decision. I disagree with the decision that she made on Judge Kavanaugh. This is 2018, not 2020, so I'm not going to talk about 2020, but I'm just telling you, at that time, I felt that she was doing a capable job. Secondly, equal pay for equal work is the law, has been the law. I've always supported it. The law that you're talking about would have absolutely multiplied lawsuits across the country. I felt it would have caused more harm than good to the cause of women's getting equal pay. On the sexual assault, Claire McCaskill and I and others on the Armed Services Committee, Tim Kaine and others, voted against that proposal because basically the proposal was to take the commanding officer out of the chain of command in dealing with sexual assault. I feel, and many others feel, that I want that commanding officer responsible for that decision. I don't want commanding officers saying, well, sexual assault's not my problem, it's over here. And a majority of the members of the committee, and it was our position was led by Senator Claire McCaskill, a former prosecutor.
Do you have a few seconds if you'd like Zach to respond?
Yeah, I would like to respond to that because if you imagine what's happening, you have a chain of command and you take the person who could be the perpetrator of a crime or friends with the perpetrator of a crime, and you allow them to be the deciding factor in whether or not these things will actually move with regard to sexual assault and the chain of command. That makes absolutely no sense. And truly, these are 3 really surprising
Thank you, Zach. We need
facts.
to move on. We're going to turn to questions that come from the public. Candidates will have 1 minute to respond, and we're going to start with Eric Brakey. This question is from Stephen Bibula. He asks, At every level of government, regulations are by far the biggest burden on my family's agribusiness, and most regulations are not making my business better or safer. FDA's Food Safety Modernization Act is one big offender among many that threaten to put me out of business. What kind of specific regulatory reform, if any, do you favor? Please be specific.
Well, I think it's a shame that so many of these regulations go into place without Congress playing any role in the process. I support something called the REINS Act, which would rein in a lot of these out-of-control federal bureaucracies filled with people that we never voted for. The REINS Act, which Senator King had an opportunity to vote for but has consistently voted against. The REINS Act would require that any new regulation that comes forward that would have a negative impact of our economy of $100 billion or more, that it would have to go to Congress for an up or down vote. It might make sense. It might be good regulation. It might not be. But our elected representatives should play a role in this. Instead, we have handed so much over to these unelected agencies, and frankly, politicians like it that way because then they don't have to be on the record as voting yes or no. So that's one proactive thing we can do. And to reinforce what this questioner is saying, I know I've toured some of our nursing homes in our state, and one of the consistent things I hear is the overregulation being a problem. We have those situations where you have 7 nurses in the back offices dealing with regulations while you only have 2 on the floor dealing with patients.
Thank you, Eric.
It's too much regulation.
Angus King, the same question to you. Would you like me to repeat it?
No, I understand, I think it is a concern, and we do have a congressional procedure. In fact, it's been used a number of times in the last couple of years. It's called the Congressional Review Act, which members of Congress can bring forth a regulation and have a vote on it, on a simple up or down vote in both houses. Unfortunately, it was used, as I think I mentioned earlier, to repeal what I thought was an important methane rule, but it also does give Congress an opportunity to be involved. One of the first bills I introduced when I came to the Senate, and have been in discussion, there have been a lot of discussion about a regulatory reform agenda. I've been involved in those from the beginning, is to set up a commission made up of private citizens, private businesses, government people, to review regulations to see whether they're still working, to see what the effect is. And if they find that they're not effective, they're not meeting their purpose, they've overstayed their welcome, then they can be scrubbed off the books. So that's the kind of thing that I think we need to do. I agree. I think regulation is an important issue, and it always has to pass the common sense test. And sometimes it doesn't, and that's where I think the CRA comes into effect, the Congressional Review Act, to take those ones that break that principle and repeal them.
Thank you. Zak Ringelstein, would you like me to repeat the question?
Yes, please do.
This is from Stephen Bibula. At every level of government, regulations are by far the biggest burden on my family agribusiness, and most regulations are not making my business better or safer. FDA's Food Safety Modernization Act is a big offender among the many that threaten to put me out of business. What kind of specific regulatory reform, if any, do you favor?
Yeah, I think we need to do constant reviews of what is both helping out our economy while also making our workers and consumers safe. And that needs to be a constant. I visited a hospital up in Washington County recently, and they said that the regulatory standards that they have to meet are inhibiting their ability to do great work. So whatever we pass, whether that's Medicare, that's a Medicare for all, or whether that's a Green New Deal, we need to make sure that the regulations make sense for the people on the ground. I saw this in teaching with standardized testing. By the way, I want to end standardized testing before high school. Countries around the world are doing that, and guess what? It's improving achievement. And the regulations in our public schools with regard to standardized testing are actually just helping Betsy DeVos and her for-profit friends. And what I experienced as a teacher is that we need to give more autonomy to teachers. This is an example of where regulations aren't working.
All right. Our second question is from W. Allen White. We'll start with Angus King. Given that twice in the last 20 years the person that became president was not the person with the most votes, do you think it's time to amend the Constitution to get rid of the Electoral College?
I don't have a clear, unequivocal answer to that. I think it's a hard question. The Electoral College has produced the result, as you mentioned, as it did this past time, and also several other times in the 20th century. On the other hand, it allows, the states are important. Each state's vote is important. If you Get rid of the Electoral College, everybody, all the attention would be on the bigger states. The smaller states wouldn't get the involvement of the candidates. In spite of these, the anomalous result that we had in 2016, where you had a winner of the Electoral College, but who lost the popular vote, I think there's something to be said for the reflection of the values of the states individually, and that's what the Electoral College protects. Without it, all the campaigning would be in the most populous areas of the country, and I'm afraid in Maine or Iowa or Oregon, we'd never see a presidential candidate.
Zak Ringelstein, would you like me to repeat the question?
No, thank you. Unequivocally, yes. The reason is that we have had to live under the reign of Bush and Trump because of this. Angus King voted for Bush, which is well known, in 2000, and now we have Trump, both of whom have increased our reliance on war, on the military. Angus King just voted for surveillance, mass surveillance, thanks to George W. Bush's policies, and he also voted for a recent increase of $82 billion to our already enormous war budget. Meanwhile, people down the street don't have health care. People down the street can't afford daycare. This is ridiculous. It's the military-industrial complex. It's because he takes money from Raytheon, Lockheed Martin. We need to get rid of this, and the reason that we're in this place is because the will of the voter is not being heard in this system.
Eric Brakey, would you like me to repeat the question?
I think I got it.
Okay.
So to answer your question, absolutely not. You know, this country, we're not supposed to be one giant city. We're supposed to be a union of various different states. And if we were to eliminate the Electoral College, yeah, you would have presidential candidates going to New York City, going to California, going to the population centers. We wouldn't hear from any of them here in Maine, and our interests would be completely left off the table. And it gets to the overall point of how our country was supposed to be set up. You know, our founders were flawed people, but they were very brilliant in many regards, particularly because they believed that power wasn't supposed to be concentrated in just this one city 500 miles away from our border. We weren't supposed to have this all-powerful city in Washington, D.C. But it's changed so much. Washington, D.C. is now the richest region in America. The 5 richest counties in America are all suburbs of Washington, D.C., where the average income is twice that of what Maine people earn. If we're going to fix this, we have to have power come back to the state and the local level. We need to be able to make decisions here in Maine that work for Maine people, not have things imposed on us from Washington, D.C. And to eliminate the Electoral College would just move us further in the wrong direction.
Thank you. We'll start with Zak Ringelstein next. This question is from Jack Norris. He writes, please ask the candidates how they would limit and/or identify outside money used to fund special individuals. Would they support strict, clean funding for all elections to control the use of dark money?
Well, I knew I liked you, Jack. Jack is my youngest son's name, by the way. But I like you because that's the whole point of my race, is that we can actually have someone who is clean and uninfluenced, representing the people's interests here in the state of Maine for once. We have a corporate establishment that runs on money. Listen, I'm not a career politician. Everyone knows that. And thank God, because I can go to bed at night. This political system is gross. It's about people going and hanging out with big donors in order to influence their votes. They write the bills, they fund the campaigns, and they expect something in return, which is their policies. We, the working class, are under attack, and this needs to end right now. And that's why I'm not taking a single penny from corporations, PACs, lobbyists, or the fossil fuel industry. And I'm very proud of it because I can stand up for the working people who deserve more. The system is rigged. And so we need a clean election system, a publicly financed system right now, no questions asked. It is the thing that is holding us back from achieving our dreams and for being a truly free and just society for all Americans.
Eric Brakey, would you like me to repeat the question?
Oh, I got it. So clean funding, I think we've heard that before. You know, I've been dealing with this issue on the state level with the Maine Clean Election Act, which frankly has done absolutely nothing to get special interest money out of politics, but what it has done is it has become a giant welfare for politicians program with our tax dollars going to pay for people's yard signs. It hasn't worked. The money still flows in, it just goes to the PACs and the political parties instead. In fact, it's made the whole system less transparent. So no, I don't support using taxpayer money to fund people's partisan political campaigns. Personally, I wouldn't want my tax dollars to go to candidates like to the left of me who want to take away our gun rights. We should be able to make those voluntary decisions ourselves. But there is an underlying problem here that is very serious. There is a problem of special interests in Washington, D.C. and our centers of government power hijacking our system and writing the laws for themselves. And our founders predicted this. This is why they said that power should be decentralized across the country. We should have our 10th Amendment, which says that those powers not expressly delegated to the Congress belong to the states and the people. Because if you put all the power in one city, that becomes a one-stop shop for the special interests. But if you disperse it and hand it back to the people, it's a lot harder for the special interest to take control.
Thank you, Angus King. Would you like me to repeat the question?
No, I think this really focuses on an important point, and there's a distinction. Your correspondent, I think, used the term dark money, and that's important. As you could already tell today, everybody knows my contributions because I have to disclose them. That's under our system. The problem is we have developed a parallel system where a billionaire can spend millions of dollars on a campaign with no disclosure. Nobody knows who it is. Nobody knows where it's coming from. And I think the people deserve to know that. I've signed on to a constitutional amendment to repeal Citizens United. Corporations are not people in the sense of the Constitution and have a right to step into our political affairs. And the whole thing of transparency, I believe the best antidote to this problem is disclosure. People know where the money's coming from, and there are limits. $2,700 is the limit that an individual can contribute to any of us, and I think that's important. The Supreme Court, I think in Citizens United, is one of the worst decisions in the history of the Supreme Court, has opened up these floodgates to unaccountable money that nobody knows where it's coming from. That's what's really changing American politics in a way that is absolutely inimical to the best interest of the American people.
Thank you, Angus King. Our final question from the audience comes from Kelly Cutchin, and Eric, we'll start with you. I think something we as a country haven't fully agreed on is the overall role of government, period, and that a lot of the inability to move forward on many issues is related to our lack of agreement on this fundamental issue. With that in mind, please ask the candidates this. In your opinion, what is the role of government?
The role of our government is very simple. It's to protect our liberties. That's what the American experiment was all about. Limited government to protect our right to life, our liberty, our pursuit of happiness. Government exists to protect us from each other, not to protect us from ourselves. You have the right to make your own choices in your own life if you're an adult citizen. That's what being in a free country is all about. I don't have to agree with your personal choices, but those are your personal choices to make so long as you're not harming other people. So if you're making a choice for what you want to do with cannabis in the privacy of your own home, that's your business, that's not government's business. If you're making your own choices and you want to be able to, carry a firearm and exercise your Second Amendment rights, you're not hurting anyone with that act. That's your right if you want to be able to defend yourself in that way. That's what a free society is all about. And I'm the only candidate on this stage who frankly wants to get Washington, D.C. to leave us alone, to let us make our own choices in our own states, in our own lives, to stop stealing so much of our money and stop telling us how to live. If other states want to do things differently, that's fine.
Thank you,
we
Eric.
live here in Maine and we should be able to make our own choices here.
Angus King, Kelly Cutchin wants to know, in your opinion, what's the role of government?
We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, that's number one, establish justice, number two, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, those two mean keep us safe, promote the general welfare and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution. I can't say it any better than that. The Constitution talks about what the role of government is, and it's the most brilliant attempt to deal with the fundamental paradox of government, which is we give government power, but how do we keep government from abusing us? And they do it by dividing power in this Rube Goldberg herky-jerky structure where you've got to have two houses of Congress, vetoes, treaties, two-thirds, all of those kinds of things. But they also, the framers said, that's not enough. There've got to be places where the government can't go, even if it follows these complicated process. That's called the Bill of Rights. That's free speech, Second Amendment, Fourth, Fifth Amendment, no due process, all of those rules. That's a sphere that's around all of us. And that's the Bill of Rights. And then finally, they split a government up between the federal government and the state governments and the local governments.
If you really believe that, then why do you vote the way you do?
Zak Ringelstein, would you like me to repeat the question?
I'm all set. I want to say that this country is based on a radical idea. And it's an experiment, but the radical idea is that we'll have freedom and justice for all people, that all men and women are created equal, and that it would be for the people and by the people. But truly, the founders would be devastated at what this government is doing to its own people. It is not run by the people. It is for the multinational corporations and by the multinational corporations, period. And this needs to end. It needs to end. We gotta call it what it is, which is a crisis. When 1% of our country owns almost half of our wealth, when 1 in 5 children in the richest country on earth are growing up in poverty, when the 4 last years were the 4 hottest years in human history, when there are more black men who are in prison today than were enslaved in the 1850s, when for the first time in a generation, life expectancy dropped this year. This is not okay, this is not just, this is not free, and we need to end the era of money in politics. I'm the only person in this race who is not taking corporate PAC lobbyists or fossil fuel money.
We're going to take another quick break. When we come back, our lightning round and closing statements. Stay with us. Welcome back to our Your Vote 2018 debate between the candidates for U.S. Senate, and now to our lightning round. In this segment, we're going to ask the candidates for brief, very brief, 1 or 2, maybe 3-word responses. We're going to start with Zak Ringelstein. Zak, should marijuana be legal at the federal level?
Yes, 100%.
All right. Eric?
Yes, absolutely.
Angus King?
Yes.
All right, we'll start with Angus King. Angus King, do you support term limits in Congress?
No. I think the people should provide the term limits.
Zak?
Yes, to save our democracy.
Eric?
Yes, and I've signed a pledge to support a constitutional amendment to the effect.
All right, Zak Ringelstein, name an issue on which you agree with President Trump. Wait. Eric.
Oh.
I'm sorry, but I'm trying to be fair here, but this gets confusing. Go ahead, Eric. Name it.
That I agree with President Trump?
Uh-huh.
Negotiating peace in North Korea.
All right, Angus.
Taking another look, a hard look at our trade policies.
Infrastructure.
All right, Angus, do you support an assault weapons ban?
No.
Zak.
Yes.
Eric.
No.
Zak, do you support spending several $1 billion for the construction of a border wall?
No.
Eric Brakey.
Potentially. Leaning towards yes.
Angus.
No, I'm for border security, but not dumb border security.
Eric Brakey, since ranked choice voting applies to your race, who will your second choice be after you vote for yourself?
Well, considering I have one opponent who's a socialist and one opponent who's gotten very rich off the taxpayers, I'm just going to be voting for myself.
Angus, who are you going to vote for number 2?
Haven't decided yet. I'll decide when I go in the polling place.
Zak?
Be nice to hear him decide. I'm going to rank Angus second.
Angus, do you support ranked choice voting?
Yes, I don't like the title. I think it really should be called instant runoff. I think it is an instant runoff, and it saves the taxpayers money and gives us a better result.
Zak, do you support it?
Yes, I even stood out in the cold last year getting petition signatures.
Zak, do you support it? Ranked choice voting?
I initially was open to it, but I think how we've seen it play out has been an utter disaster. And so as it's currently implemented, where we have this hodgepodge system, no, I don't.
Okay, let's try to get back to quick answers. I'm being a little loose here. Zak, do you support elevating the Katahdin Woods and Waters National Monument to National Park status?
Yes, I do.
Eric Brakey, do you support elevating the Katahdin Woods and Waters National Monument to National Park status?
No, we should be protecting our sovereignty here in Maine.
Angus King?
Yes.
Eric Brakey, should U.S. pull its forces from Syria?
Absolutely, 100%. I would do it yesterday.
Angus King?
Yes.
Zak
Yes.
Ringelstein? Angus King, do you support the tariffs President Trump is imposing on various goods and services?
No, I think it's a sledgehammer where a scalpel would be more useful, and it's boomeranging and hurting Maine.
Zach?
No.
Eric?
I support tough negotiations that appear to be working.
Zach, is health care a right?
Yes, and it's the reason I'm running for U.S. Senate.
Eric Brakey, is health care a right?
You can't have a right to something that's produced by other people's labor.
Angus King, is health care a right?
Yes.
Eric Brakey, do you support Central Maine Power's proposed transmission line to bring hydropower from Canada to Massachusetts through Maine?
Not currently. There are too many unanswered questions.
Angus King?
Not currently. There are too many unanswered questions.
Zak Ringelstein?
No.
Angus King, do you believe elected officials have an obligation to provide frequent access to the press and to respond promptly to media inquiries?
Absolutely.
Zach?
Yes.
Eric?
Yes.
Zach, do you support the deportation of undocumented immigrants?
No, with all my heart.
Eric Brakey?
Yes, I do.
And Angus King?
If you're talking about DACA kids, no. I think there needs to be a process.
All right. Eric Brakey, this will be the last one, should the National Flood Insurance Program be continued in the face of climate change?
I think that it's been a boondoggle of a program, and were there more time, we could talk about it more.
Angus? National Flood Insurance Program be continued?
Yes.
And Zach?
Yes.
All righty. Guess what? Time for our closing statements. Each candidate has 1 minute. The order was determined earlier by random drawing. So Zak Ringelstein, you're first.
All right. My name is Zak Ringelstein. I'm a teacher, I'm a dad, and the reason I'm running is because regular working people need to be sitting at the table in Washington, not career professional politicians. I was invited to the White House a few years ago to talk about early education policy. I got in the room ready to make some change, and I realized after a few minutes that I was the only person in that room who had ever worked in a school building. That is the problem. Working people are not at the table, and when we're not at the table, we're on the menu. We need to make sure that we are stood up for. I am going to stand up for you because I'm not taking corporate, PAC, lobbyist, or fossil fuel money. We have ranked choice voting. So I ask for you to rank your hopes, rank me 1 and Angus 2 on November 6th. Thank you so much. Let's vote for the future in this election. We don't have time to wait.
Eric Brakey, you're second.
We have a big choice ahead of us this November. We've been getting a rotten deal as Maine people for a long time, actually. Washington, D.C. is the richest region in America, where the average income is twice that of what Maine people earn, and yet they don't actually make anything there. They're not known for manufacturing or agriculture or finance. They're known for one thing they're really good at: stealing from the rest of us, from our paychecks with taxes, our future with debt, the value of our savings and our retirement as they print trillions of dollars out of thin air. And certain special interests, including my opponent Angus King, have gotten very rich off this arrangement, profiting off the hard work of Maine taxpayers. We have an opportunity for a better deal. The question this November is, are we going to renew this rotten contract for another 6 years, or are we going to demand a better deal? Better jobs so our kids can stay here in Maine, which we can achieve by getting Washington out of our way. Better health care by getting the bureaucrats out from between us and our doctors, and more freedom so we can make our own choices in our own lives and in our own state. That's what I'm offering the Maine people this November, a better deal for Maine. If you're ready to shuffle the rotten deals aside and get a better deal, I ask for your vote on November 6th.
Thank you. Angus King.
I'm surprised in this discussion we haven't mentioned opioids. It's the most serious public health problem that I've seen in Maine in my lifetime. What I want to talk about in my minute is what we can do to deal with the issues that we have before us, like opioids, like the isolation of seniors. That I was in a round table in Machias. They said that there are seniors up there who are in their homes that the only person they see all week is the Meals on Wheels driver. Like the devastation in many of our mill communities, up in Millinocket, in Madison, in Lincoln, and how to rebuild those economies. That's the tough part. The other part is taking direct action to try to act on those things. We passed a major opioid bill in the midst of this contentious Congress, 99-1. That's going to bring some help to Maine. That's something that I was proud to be involved with. Also, all the kinds of issues of dealing with seniors and in dealing with the rural economy of Maine. broadband, new products out of the forest, seeing new jobs, new opportunity. That's what it's all about, and that's what I've been all about, listening to Maine and then acting on behalf of the people.
And that is the final word. Thank you for joining us for this Your Vote 2018 Senate debate. If you missed any part of the program, you can see it in its entirety on demand at mainepublic.org/yourvote. A special thanks to Bowdoin College. For all of us here at Maine Public, I'm Jennifer Rooks. Thank you for joining us.
Go Brakey!
Which party will control the House and Senate? Watch C-SPAN's live